Racist cops arrest black woman, stunned, when she's the judge presiding over their case. A crisp autumn night. Flashing red and blue lights cut through the darkness, sirens echoing in the distance. Inside a sleek car, a poised black woman is pulled over for no apparent reason. She has no idea this routine traffic stop will unravel into a life-changing confrontation with two officers fueled by prejudice. What begins as a humiliating arrest soon transforms into the ultimate test of justice when those same cops appear in court, only to discover the very judge presiding over their fate is the woman they wronged. In this explosive tale of power, redemption, and reckoning, the tables are about to turn. Cook County, in the heart of Illinois, had always been a place brimming with contrasts. On one end, bustling city streets lit up with neon signs from late-night restaurants and venues. On the other, quiet suburbs where the only illumination came from dim porch lights and the occasional passing car. People who grew up here spoke of a deep-seated pride, even if the county was overshadowed by the city of Chicago's towering skyline. Something about Cook County's mixture of urban hustle and suburban calm gave it a unique charm and a unique set of challenges. On a brisk autumn evening, the wind whipped through the narrow streets. Streetlights illuminated a patchwork of fallen leaves. By 10 o'clock, traffic had thinned out. Businesses were shutting their doors, and only a handful of cars roamed the roads. At the corner of Elmwood and Harrison, two police officers sat idly in their cruiser. They were supposed to be on standard patrol, but they had quickly turned the shift into an opportunity to investigate any vehicle they found suspicious. Officer Brian Stokes, a tall man in his late 30s, drummed his fingers on the dashboard. He had a short temper and a narrow worldview inherited from the environment he grew up in. His partner, Officer Daniel Trent, a stockier man with cropped hair, had joined the force just a couple of years ago. Trent idolized Stokes's confidence, and sometimes it shaded into arrogance. Conversations in their cruiser often took a dark turn. Complaints about neighborhoods going downhill, mocking remarks about people of color, and a shared conviction they were keeping the town clean. As they idled, Stokes was the first to notice the sleek black sedan rolling out of a side street. Nothing particularly stood out about the vehicle, no broken lights, no suspicious activity. Yet the moment he saw a flash of brown skin through the windshield, something inside Stokes bristled with a mean-spirited curiosity. He nudged Trent. "Let's pull that one over," he said. Trent shrugged, used to following Stokes's lead. The cruiser's engine roared to life, and the swirling red and blue lights popped on. Behind the wheel of the sedan, Ebony Caldwell felt her stomach sink. She'd done nothing wrong. She was driving under the speed limit, seatbelt on, phone in her handbag. All her paperwork was up to date. Her driver's license, registration, insurance. Normally, Ebony was used to occasional looks or even a random traffic stop, but something about this particular encounter felt off from the start. She quietly pulled over, methodically gathered her driver's license and insurance card, and waited for the officers. Her heart thumped uncomfortably. She had grown up in a loving home in South Chicago, excelled in school, and built a promising future. A future, ironically enough, devoted to the law. At this point, Ebony was a seasoned attorney with a strong record and a growing reputation. She understood every dimension of the legal system, from the brilliance of the Constitution to the systemic flaws that put some at a disadvantage the moment they were born. But nothing in her education or professional experience could fully prepare her for an encounter with two officers determined to let their bias steer the situation. Stokes approached on the driver's side, tapping the window with a flashlight. Trent hung back, hand resting near his holster as if Ebony posed some immediate threat. The men's body language alone was a warning sign. Ebony took a deep breath, pressed the button to lower her window, and looked up. "Yes, officer?" she asked, voice steady. "License and registration," Stokes demanded. No greeting, no explanation. The unblinking flashlight shone in Ebony's face, forcing her to squint. Still calm, Ebony handed him the documents. "May I ask why I'm being stopped?" Stokes didn't respond. Instead, he glanced toward Trent, who strolled up behind him. "Where you headed tonight?" Trent said, arms crossed. Ebony cleared her throat, mustering as much composure as she could. "I'm on my way home." Stokes stared at the license in his hand. "You live around here?" She nodded. "A couple of blocks over. I was at a dinner event downtown." Trent puffed out his chest. "Fancy car for someone living in that part of town. You sure it's yours?" Ebony's jaw tightened. She had long prepared herself for microaggressions, but the question was plainly insulting. Instead of arguing, she managed a calm, "Yes, officer, it's mine. Everything is in order, as you can see." She expected a short exchange, and perhaps a ticket if they found some random excuse, but the officers lingered. Stokes continued scanning her documents with an almost resentful expression. "Insurance is current," he muttered to Trent, though Ebony could hear him clearly. "But you know how these folks are, always find something." Trent nodded, seeming to take that as a cue. "Ma'am, why don't you step out of the car?" Her heart sank further. She quickly weighed her options. She knew her rights, but she also knew that asserting them too aggressively could escalate the situation. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped onto the sidewalk. Instantly, Stokes moved in. Hands on the hood. "I beg your pardon?" Ebony asked, trying to keep her voice steady, despite the dread growing inside her. "We're going to do a quick search," Trent interjected. "Officer safety, standard procedure." Ebony knew this wasn't standard procedure, far from it. But with 2 officers and no witnesses around, the risk of them using force loomed large. She complied, placing her palms on the cold hood of her car as the brisk wind made her shiver. Stokes patted her down roughly, his attitude dripping with contempt. Trent circled the vehicle, peering through the windows. The search turned up nothing, of course. Yet the officers didn't stop. Stokes took Ebony's handbag and emptied its contents onto the passenger seat. A wave of humiliation washed over her as she saw her personal items scattered. She let out a shaky breath. "Officer, I have rights." "Oh, do you now?" Stokes barked, cutting her off. He turned to Trent, picking up Ebony's phone. "She thinks she's some big shot. Let's see how she likes a night in lockup." Trent grinned, clearly feeding on his partner's energy. "Indeed. Let's see." Ebony found her voice sharper, more adamant. "This is unconstitutional. You have no probable cause." Stokes shot her a glare so venomous it sent a chill down her spine. "Probable cause?" He let out a derisive laugh. "Lady, you're resisting." That was all the pretext they needed. In less than a heartbeat, Ebony felt metal cuffs tighten around her wrists. She shut her eyes, her mind racing. She was being arrested on fabricated grounds, and she knew it, and so did they. But it didn't matter. Right now, in this place, it was her word against theirs. As the cruiser lights flickered, Ebony felt dread coil around her heart. She had never been this terrified in her life. Stokes snatched Ebony's license and looked at it again. Then he taunted, "Ebony Caldwell, huh? Well, Ebony, you can tell your fancy dinner friends how you spent the night in a cell." They pushed her into the back of the squad car, the door slamming shut with a metallic thud that echoed in her mind. As they drove off, Ebony's eyes stung with tears she refused to let fall. She leaned her head back, inhaled, and told herself, "I'll get out of this." She was an attorney, after all. She understood the system, even if it was broken. These officers had no idea who they had just targeted. In the dark back seat, Ebony Caldwell began to form the silent seeds of a plan. She might be at their mercy tonight, but she vowed she would fight back, legally, ferociously, and on her own turf. Because while they'd singled her out for humiliation, they had unwittingly tangled with a woman who knew how to wield the law with precision. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a chain of events that would spin both her life and theirs into a storm of epic proportions. Long before Ebony Caldwell found herself cuffed in the backseat of a police cruiser, she was a girl with lofty dreams. Raised by her grandmother, Loretta Caldwell, in a modest home on the south side of Chicago, Ebony quickly learned the power of resilience. The small two-bedroom house creaked when the winter winds blew, and the ancient radiators hissed with every attempt to keep the chill at bay. Yet within those walls, Ebony found warmth, love, and unwavering encouragement. Every morning, Loretta would serve up a hearty breakfast, oatmeal simmered in milk with a dash of cinnamon and a potent dose of wisdom. "Child," she would say, "the world ain't always fair. You gotta be twice as good to get half of what they have, but don't let that stop you. You're destined for great things." The smell of stale coffee and disinfectant greeted Ebony the moment she stepped inside the police station. The fluorescent overhead lights cast a harsh glare, intensifying every line and shadow. Stokes shoved her forward, guiding her toward a desk manned by a tired-looking desk sergeant. The sergeant hardly looked up. He merely passed a clipboard over. "What have we got?" he asked Stokes without emotion. "Resisting arrest. Failure to comply," Stokes answered, handing over Ebony's license. Trent stood by, watching Ebony with a smug expression. To the side, a couple of other officers milled about, some with coffee cups, others poring over paperwork. None seemed eager to intervene or ask any questions. Ebony mustered her courage. "Officer, you have no grounds to hold me. This is a wrongful arrest." Her voice sounded more confident than she felt, but she refused to cower. A flicker of curiosity crossed the desk sergeant's face. He glanced at Ebony's license, reading the name. "Caldwell. Are you an attorney or something?" It was standard station procedure to note if a detainee had any special status. Ebony hesitated, knowing how these details could shift the power dynamic. But if she admitted she was an attorney, would it make matters better or worse? She couldn't hide it forever. Her profession would eventually come to light. "Yes, I'm an attorney," she said. Stokes snorted dismissively. "That explains the attitude." The sergeant pursed his lips, but didn't dig deeper. Possibly he was tired, or maybe he recognized a setup. He merely pointed to a side room. "Search her. She'll go in a holding cell until we do the paperwork." Stokes grabbed Ebony's elbow with an unnecessary tightness, guiding her down a hallway. The scuffed walls were lined with a few battered benches. A flickering light overhead cast unsettling shadows. The deeper they went, the more claustrophobic it felt. They stopped at a small room, its only notable features a plain wooden table and a row of lockers in the back. A female officer, whose name tag read Officer Wilson, stepped in. She looked Ebony up and down, her face impassive. "I'll take it from here," she said to Stokes. He nodded, stepping out with a mocking smirk. As soon as the door closed, Wilson turned to Ebony. "I'm sorry, but I have to pat you down again," she said, her tone professional. Ebony offered a weary nod, letting her arms be lifted and her torso checked once more. She kept her eyes fixed on the chipped linoleum floor. When Wilson asked her to remove her shoes, Ebony complied. She felt a fresh wave of humiliation, but also relief that the search was being handled by someone who didn't seem eager to degrade her further. Officer Wilson finished her routine, returned Ebony's shoes, and pointed to the table. "You can put your personal items here. We'll log them before you go to the cell." Ebony sighed, placing her watch, a small ring, and what was left of her belongings. Wilson scribbled notes on a form. The silence between them was taut, yet Ebony found herself longing to say something, anything, that might clarify this entire fiasco. She settled for a question. "Officer, do I get a phone call soon?" Wilson, clearly more humane than Stokes or Trent, nodded. "Usually once you're processed, but if you need an attorney—" Ebony almost laughed at the irony. "I am an attorney." Wilson's eyebrows rose briefly, but she said nothing else. She simply led Ebony down another corridor until they arrived at the holding cells. Most were empty, save for one occupant slumped on a bench, apparently asleep. Another occupant, a young man with disheveled clothes, stood leaning against the bars, staring with a mix of boredom and desperation. The click of the cell door behind Ebony was a jarring sound. She took a seat on the cold metal bench and rested her head against the wall. Thoughts swirled in her mind, the upcoming weeks, her new role as a judge, her fear of a tarnished reputation if this arrest somehow went on record. She knew the law was on her side, but at this moment, all she could do was wait. Time dragged. She lost track of how long she sat there, listening to the steady drip of a leaky pipe, the muffled sounds of police chatter from the hallway. Eventually, the desk sergeant appeared outside the cell, a ring of keys in hand. "Caldwell?" he called. Ebony stood, her spine stiffening. "Yes?" He unlocked the cell door. "You're free to go." "Lucky you." Surprised, Ebony stepped out. "What do you mean?" "Paperwork's not even in the system yet. No charges. Looks like you got some friends in high places." Ebony blinked, confused. "I made no calls. Who intervened?" The sergeant shrugged as he handed back her belongings. "Captain told us to release you. That's all I know." She glanced around, but there was no sign of Stokes or Trent. She had no idea what changed behind the scenes, though she suspected that maybe her firm or some contact had overheard the arrest call. Regardless, she was free, yet not satisfied. She had been wronged, and she had no intention of letting it slide. "Thank you," she said to the sergeant, although she meant it more as an expression of polite reflex than genuine gratitude. He simply gave a grunt in response. Ebony walked out of the station into the crisp night. The air felt cleaner, lighter. She shivered, wishing she had a coat or at least a friend to share this moment with. She was still shaken, humiliated, but also filled with a sense of renewed fire. She had studied the law and upheld it. Now she would leverage that knowledge to seek recourse for what happened. Because for every Ebony Caldwell out there, someone who knew her rights, there were countless people who did not, who ended up rotting in holding cells or facing bogus charges because they lacked the resources or the voice to fight back. Stepping onto the sidewalk, Ebony fumbled with her phone to see that she had a flurry of missed calls and messages. It was nearly midnight. Her car was presumably still near the site of her arrest, so she tapped on a rideshare app, trying to keep her composure. She inhaled deeply, reflecting on the bizarre turn her evening had taken. When the rideshare arrived, Ebony slid into the back seat. The driver, a middle-aged man with an amiable smile, asked if she was all right, noticing her disheveled appearance. Ebony managed a small nod. "I'll be fine," she said, though she stared out the window with stormy eyes. Because in her mind, a vow echoed, "This will not go unanswered." Morning light spilled through the blinds of Ebony's apartment, revealing a space that was both cozy and tastefully decorated. The walls held framed diplomas and artwork celebrating African-American heritage, figures like Thurgood Marshall, Constance Baker Motley, and of course a portrait of Loretta Caldwell, Ebony's grandmother. Despite the comfort of home, Ebony's mind was anything but at ease. She had barely slept. Flashes of last night's humiliating arrest haunted her every time she closed her eyes. She rose from bed, made herself a strong cup of black coffee, and settled at her small dining table, phone in hand, preparing to tackle the aftermath. Before she could dial any number, her phone buzzed with a call from a familiar contact, James Harlow, a partner at the law firm where she had worked. He was a mentor figure, someone Ebony respected for his unflinching dedication to justice. She answered. "James, hi." "Ebony, my dear, I heard about the incident." "Are you okay?" His voice brimmed with concern. She rubbed her temple. "I'm okay, physically, but I'm shaken. We need to talk. I've already been in contact with some people who can help. Look, I know you're transitioning to the bench soon, but you can still file a complaint, maybe even a lawsuit. Those officers have a record." Her heart quickened. "A record?" He exhaled heavily. "Yes, I reached out to a friend in internal affairs at the Chicago Police Department. Though your incident was in Cook County's jurisdiction, there's some overlap. Let's just say these two have a laundry list of complaints filed against them, ranging from harassment to excessive force. Nothing has stuck so far." Indignation flared within Ebony. Unbelievable, but not surprising. You're not alone in this. I'd suggest coming by the firm today if you can. We can discuss your options. And Ebony... Yes? His tone softened. I'm sorry this happened to you. She closed her eyes, letting his words soothe some of the raw edges of her emotions. Thank you, James. I'll be there in an hour. After a quick shower, Ebony dressed in a simple navy blue suit. She looked in the mirror and saw dark circles under her eyes, but also a spark of determination. She was Ebony Caldwell, newly appointed judge, and she wouldn't let this injustice break her. The law firm was located on the 22nd floor of a downtown skyscraper, a sleek modern space that offered stunning views of the city. Ebony stepped off the elevator and was greeted by a busy reception area where staff hustled about. More than a few glanced at her with compassion, presumably already knowing about her ordeal. She found James in his glass-walled office, the door ajar. He motioned for her to come in. Once seated, he let out a breath. I'm relieved to see you. Rumors are spreading, but we'll handle this. Ebony nodded, leaning forward. I want to file a formal complaint, and I'm open to pursuing any legal avenues to hold those officers accountable. James smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I thought as much. We'll get your statement down. Our Civil Rights Division has a top-notch lawyer, Vanessa Blake, who can handle the official complaint. She's thorough and relentless. Ebony had heard of Vanessa's reputation, a straight-shooter who disliked bullies in uniform. That sounds perfect, Ebony said. As they discussed strategy, Ebony's phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something nudged her to answer. Hello? A brisk female voice spoke. Hello, Miss Caldwell. This is Captain Danielle Morris from the Cook County Police Department. Ebony stiffened. Yes? I wanted to extend an apology for the incident last night. I've looked into the matter, and you were released with no charges. Also, I understand you hold a judicial appointment. Ebony's heart pounded. A direct call from a captain was unusual. That's correct. Captain, with all due respect, an apology over the phone isn't enough. Those officers acted unlawfully. Morris cleared her throat. I understand. An internal investigation is already underway. I'd appreciate it if you'd come in to provide a statement. I want to assure you the department takes this seriously. Seriously enough to fire them, Ebony replied, voice edged with anger. A measured pause followed. We're not jumping to conclusions, Ms. Caldwell, but I promise a thorough investigation. Ebony bit back a retort. I'll give my statement, but I'm also filing my own complaint. Thank you for reaching out. She ended the call, her frustration evident. James had been listening. Seems they're scrambling. Ebony raised an eyebrow. Probably. But will it matter? You mentioned their record. They still have badges, at least for now. James motioned for her to sit at a small round table where Vanessa Blake was waiting with a laptop open, ready to record Ebony's testimony. Ebony recounted every detail: how she was pulled over without cause, the humiliating pat-down, the false charges of resistance, and the arbitrary detainment at the station. Vanessa typed furiously, pausing occasionally to clarify a detail or ask a question. When the statement was complete, Ebony felt an odd mixture of catharsis and raw outrage. She wanted justice, not only for herself, but for the countless others who had likely faced similar or worse harassment from these men. Vanessa closed the laptop. This is powerful, but we need to be strategic. You're about to be sworn in as a judge. We need to ensure the complaint doesn't raise questions of conflict of interest, especially if you end up overseeing a related case. Ebony pressed her lips together. You're right. I'll do whatever is necessary to remain impartial in my role. But these men need to be held accountable. James nodded. We'll do the heavy lifting. Focus on your upcoming appointment. Don't let this derail your career. Use it to underscore why you wanted to become a judge in the first place. His words resonated. Ebony inhaled deeply, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Indeed, this was precisely why she'd become a judge, to ensure fairness, to be a voice when the system tried to silence one. As the meeting concluded, Ebony rose to leave. She shook hands with Vanessa, who reassured her they would handle everything meticulously. James escorted her to the elevator, stopping to speak quietly. "Just be careful," he said. "These officers might not take kindly to a complaint. People like them can be vindictive." Ebony lifted her chin. "Let them try. I'm done being afraid." She stepped into the elevator, her reflection in the mirrored interior revealing a composed woman, though one simmering with quiet fury. Outside, the city bustled as usual, oblivious to the legal storm brewing. In the days to come, Ebony would find her anger and righteousness tested, but she would also discover unexpected allies, hints that the system could, if pressed hard enough, right some of its own wrongs. Little did she know, the biggest twist was yet to unfold. Because the wheels of justice move in mysterious ways, and sometimes karma has a knack for dramatic timing. 2 weeks passed. The day Ebony Caldwell was sworn in as a judge arrived without incident, yet she could feel the tension humming beneath the surface. The induction ceremony took place in a stately courtroom inside the Cook County Courthouse, a grand building with pillars and steps that exuded the weight of history. Ebony stood tall in her new black robe, her braids swept back in a neat bun. Family, friends, and colleagues filled the benches, smiling proudly. Even the media had shown mild interest in this historic appointment. She was among the youngest African-American women to ascend to the Cook County bench. Her heart fluttered as she took the oath, vowing to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the land with fairness and impartiality. Yet, behind her calm smile, Ebony wrestled with the memory of her arrest. Each day since that night, she had waited for updates from Vanessa about the complaint against Officers Stokes and Trent. She heard only that the internal investigation was ongoing. Ebony knew how these investigations could drag on, often ending in minimal discipline, if any. After the ceremony, Ebony mingled with well-wishers in a reception area. Judge Marian Vasquez, a longtime friend and now colleague, pulled her aside. "Congratulations, Ebony. We're so proud to have you on the bench." "Thank you, Judge Vasquez," Ebony replied, aware that addressing her friend by first name now felt strangely informal. Vasquez leaned in, her voice lowering. "I heard about the complaint you filed. I want you to know I support you wholeheartedly. We've had issues with those officers before." Ebony's eyes widened. "You have?" Vasquez nodded. "Yes, but it's always been hush-hush. They're known to pull stunts like that in neighborhoods with higher minority populations. Complaints pop up, but no one has effectively pinned them. I hope you can." Ebony felt a mixture of outrage and resolve. "I intend to." That evening, Ebony went home, a swirl of conflicting emotions in her chest. She was now Judge Caldwell, a position of considerable influence. At the same time, she was still Ebony, who had endured humiliation at the hands of men entrusted with public safety. She found herself pacing the living room, half listening to the local news recapping her swearing in. She muted the TV. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. "Dinner tonight with some colleagues. A small celebration." Ebony typed a brief reply. "Thanks, but I need some rest. Rain check?" He quickly responded with a thumbs-up emoji. She sank onto her sofa, letting her mind wander. The combination of her new judicial responsibilities and her personal quest for justice created an undercurrent of unease. In the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the feeling that Stokes and Trent might retaliate if their internal investigation gained traction. Just then, her phone lit up again, this time with an unknown number. She answered cautiously, only to hear a raspy voice. "Ms. Caldwell, or should I say Judge Caldwell now?" Her breath caught. "Who is this?" A low chuckle. "An old friend." Alarm pricked at her. "Identify yourself," she demanded. "Let's just say I'm someone who's seen what Stokes and Trent are capable of. I have evidence you might find useful if you really want to take them down, but I need to meet you in person." Her heart thumped. "Why the secrecy?" A pause. Because these guys have connections. Let's just say going public could put me in danger. But I can't let them keep doing this. Ebony glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m. Where do you propose we meet? Tomorrow, 8 p.m., Lincoln Park, near the old fountain. Come alone. The line went dead before she could question further. She stared at her phone, a storm of dread and hope swirling inside her. Was this legitimate or a trap? Either way, Ebony recognized the potential. If someone had hard evidence of Stokes and Trent's misconduct, it could finally hold them accountable. At the same time, she was keenly aware of the danger. She was a judge now, a public figure. She needed to be careful. Yet Ebony Caldwell was not one to back down from a chance to expose corruption, especially if it might prevent others from being victimized. She decided to prepare carefully. If the call was genuine, it might be the breakthrough she needed. If it was a ruse, she'd handle it as she had always handled challenges, with a firm resolve and a clear mind. The next day at the courthouse, Ebony's official duties began. She presided over minor hearings, misdemeanors, initial arraignments, and strived to demonstrate fairness, even as she navigated the new responsibilities of the bench. She wore her robe with pride, mindful of every word she spoke from the bench. Colleagues, bailiffs, and clerks all treated her respectfully, some warmly, others with a cautious deference. The court staff was used to new judges cycling in, but Ebony felt the weight of being different, younger, black and female. She was under a microscope, every decision analyzed, every nuance dissected, yet she held her head high, determined to prove she deserved this seat. The hours stretched, and as the workday ended, Ebony's mind circled back to the strange phone call. True to the caller's word, Ebony arrived at Lincoln Park by 7:50 p.m., sporting a casual jacket and jeans, hoping to avoid recognition. The park was relatively empty at this hour. A few joggers and dog walkers passed by, but paid little attention to her. By the old fountain, a once grand structure now chipped and weather-worn, she spotted a figure in a hooded jacket pacing nervously. Ebony approached, nerves thrumming. "Hello?" The figure turned, revealing a young woman maybe in her mid-20s. Her eyes darted around as if checking for tails. "You're Ebony Caldwell?" Ebony nodded. "I am. And you?" "Call me Tasha. I don't want my real name out there. At least not until I'm sure I can trust you." Ebony studied Tasha's face, noticing signs of bruises around her cheek and a faint scar on her forehead. "Were you hurt by them?" Ebony asked softly. Tasha swallowed hard, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes. About 6 months ago, Stokes and Trent busted into my apartment on some bogus warrant. They roughed me up, claimed I was resisting. I spent a night in jail. They turned my life upside down." Ebony's fists clenched in quiet rage. "I'm sorry. I'm pursuing legal action against them. You said you have evidence?" Tasha nodded, glancing over her shoulder. "Video. They came back once, bragging about how they can do whatever they want. My boyfriend had a hidden camera. We recorded them taking cash from our table, money we'd saved for rent. They laughed, calling it a tax. We filed a complaint, but the video mysteriously disappeared from the station's evidence room." Ebony's jaw tightened. "But you have the original copy?" A faint smile tugged at Tasha's lips. "A backup, on a private cloud. They never found it. I was too scared to come forward again because they threatened me. But I've been following your case. Figured if you're willing to stand up to them, maybe I can give you the leverage you need." Hope blossomed in Ebony's chest. This was potentially explosive proof of corruption. "I can ensure your safety if you testify. I have connections, and as a judge, I can request protective measures." Tasha exhaled shakily. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." Ebony handed Tasha a business card with her direct line. "This is my private number. Call me tomorrow. We'll arrange a meeting with my attorney. We'll do it by the book." Tasha nodded, slipping the card into her pocket. "All right. Thank you, Miss Caldwell." They parted ways, Ebony feeling an unusual mixture of exhilaration and foreboding. She had fresh evidence to use against Stokes and Trent, which could bolster her complaint significantly. But Tasha's terror was contagious. These officers had proven themselves capable of threats, theft, and brutality. They wouldn't hesitate to strike again. Walking back through the darkened park, Ebony dialed James, leaving him a voicemail. "Something big has come up. We might have the evidence we need. Call me back ASAP." She pocketed her phone and sped her pace, feeling the night air press around her. In the shadows, a ripple of fear awakened, but Ebony whispered to herself, "I'm doing the right thing." Because the right thing, no matter how dangerous, was exactly what Ebony Caldwell had sworn to uphold. A wave of despair crashed over Ebony. She was at their mercy, and they had none. She prayed for some miracle, some bystander to hear or see something. Her mind spun. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw headlights sweeping across the lot. Another vehicle entered, an unmarked black sedan. Panic flashed across Stokes' face. "Who the hell is that?" As the sedan stopped, doors flew open. A man in a suit and two uniformed officers sprang out, guns drawn. "Freeze!" "Drop the weapon!" Chaos erupted. Stokes and Trent scrambled to flee. One of the uniformed officers tackled Trent to the ground, wresting the gun away. The suited man aimed at Stokes, who hesitated, then raised his hands, letting the weapon clatter. Ebony collapsed to her knees, the sudden shift in movement releasing her from Trent's grip. She gasped for breath, trying to focus on the improbable scene unfolding. Through her haze, she recognized the man in the suit, James Harlow. He rushed to her, kneeling, eyes wide with concern. "Ebony, oh God, are you all right?" She wiped at the blood on her lip, confusion and relief mingling. "James, how—" "I had a hunch you might be in danger. I've been tracking threatening messages, enlisted the help of some good cops who wanted these guys off the streets. We put a tracker on your car." Tears welled in Ebony's eyes, a mixture of gratitude and shock. She leaned into James for support, her mind spinning. Uniformed officers cuffed Stokes and Trent, reading them their rights. They had no chance to protest or spin excuses, caught in the act of assaulting a judge. The plan Ebony's allies enacted might have saved her life. Paramedics arrived moments later, examining Ebony's injuries. She insisted on minimal fuss, refusing to leave until Stokes and Trent were safely taken away. The paramedics cleaned her cuts and bruises, their murmurs of comfort a distant hum in her dazed mind. As Stokes and Trent were led away in cuffs, Ebony mustered the strength to watch. It was a sight that should have felt triumphant, but all she felt was hollow relief. This was how deep their corruption ran. They were willing to kidnap and assault her to keep their dirty secrets hidden. One of the honest officers approached Ebony. "Judge Caldwell, we'll need your statement. But for now, please seek medical attention." She nodded, tears finally escaping her eyes. James gently guided her toward the ambulance. She sank onto the stretcher, adrenaline ebbing, leaving her shaky and nauseous. In that grimy lot, under broken windows and flickering street lamps, karma had arrived. And Ebony Caldwell, battered but unbroken, clung to the knowledge that justice was finally coming for the men who had abused their power for far too long. Several days later, Ebony Caldwell sat in a hospital bed, her injuries healing, but still visible. A large bruise marred her left cheek, and her ribs ached from the repeated blows. Yet her spirits were buoyed by a single piece of news delivered by James that morning. Stokes and Trent had been formally charged with assault, kidnapping, and a host of other offenses tied to their corruption. Both men were arraigned in Cook County's criminal court. Their bail hearing was fast approaching, and Ebony, though now a sitting judge, would not preside over that hearing, given the clear conflict of interest. Instead, she was one of the key witnesses, and the district attorney's office was pursuing the case aggressively. In a twist of fate, Ebony's official docket as a judge was set weeks before the assault, and ironically, the first major case assigned to her was a sweeping civil lawsuit against the Cook County Police Department, specifically addressing repeated claims of racial profiling and misconduct. While Ebony had no direct conflict with this case, she had recused herself from any matter solely involving Stokes or Trent. This particular lawsuit named the entire department as a defendant. The morning Ebony resumed her seat on the bench, she moved carefully, conscious of her still tender injuries. Spectators filled the rows, many from the media eager to see how the judge who'd been attacked by bad cops would rule in a case alleging misconduct at large. The tension in the air was palpable. As Ebony took her seat, she reminded herself of her duty, to remain impartial, to follow the law. Her personal trauma couldn't dictate her decisions, no matter how righteous her anger. She had sworn an oath. The attorneys for the plaintiffs, a collection of civil rights groups and individual citizens, argued that the department had systematically ignored red flags about rogue officers. Ebony listened intently, nodding at points, asking incisive questions. Then came the defense's turn. The police department's legal team offered a polished presentation, claiming that any misconduct by individual officers was isolated, not representative of the institution as a whole. Ebony noticed a few uniformed officers in the gallery, shifting uncomfortably. They knew what had happened to Ebony, and perhaps they feared what might come to light. As the hearing progressed, Ebony kept her composure, but inside she fumed at the department's attempts to dismiss these issues as minor. Images of Stokes and Trent, smirking, uncaring, flashed in her mind. She recalled Tasha's battered face, the tears she shed explaining how they stole her rent money. Isolated incidents, Ebony thought bitterly. Please. By lunchtime, Ebony recessed the court, stepping into her chambers. Harriet, her clerk, quickly followed with a bottle of water and a look of concern. "You're doing great, Judge Caldwell," she said softly. Ebony sank into the chair behind her desk, rubbing her temple. "Thanks, Harriet. It's just... this is draining." Harriet nodded. "You're strong. And fair. That's what matters. The truth will come out." Indeed, Ebony intended to ensure that truth had every opportunity to be heard. She had lived through the nightmare. She wouldn't let the department sidestep responsibility if systemic failures were proven. By late afternoon, the case resumed. The gallery was fuller now, journalists sniffing for sensational headlines, community members seeking justice, and some uniformed officers supporting their department. Ebony proceeded with the hearing, allowing each side to present evidence, question witnesses, and respond to cross-examinations. Around mid-afternoon, an unexpected visitor entered the courtroom, Captain Danielle Morris, the officer who had called Ebony to apologize weeks prior. Morris took a seat behind the defense team, but, from her posture, appeared anxious. The hearing stretched into the next day. In that session, the plaintiffs called Captain Morris to testify. Ebony's eyebrows shot up. This was not part of the initial witness list. A hush fell over the courtroom as Morris took the stand, swore to tell the truth, and began her testimony. Morris spoke slowly, carefully choosing her words. She admitted that the department had ongoing issues with officers like Stokes and Trent. She outlined the numerous complaints, the repeated instances of lost or misplaced evidence, and the covert culture of protection among certain ranks. Each revelation was like a hammer blow, shattering the defense's veneer of plausible denial. The day arrived. The courtroom brimmed with spectators, a frenzy of cameras in the hallway. Ebony felt a profound sense of discomfort as she took her seat behind the bench, gavel in hand. She wore her black robe, but beneath it her heart raced with conflicting emotions. This is so wrong, she thought. But it has to be done formally. Stokes and Trent were led into the courtroom, now in suits provided by their legal team, hands cuffed in front of them. They stared at Ebony with a mix of shock and horror. She swallowed hard, meeting neither man's gaze. The prosecuting attorney rose, looking uncertain. The defense attorney, a wiry man with thinning hair, cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I must raise the issue of conflict of interest. Judge Caldwell was allegedly assaulted by my clients. We request an immediate recusal." Ebony nodded, her voice calm but firm. I agree with the defense that there is a conflict of interest. However, procedural rules require a formal reassignment granted by the administrative judge. I have filed the necessary paperwork. Until that reassignment, I am required to convene this court." A confused murmur ran through the gallery. The press hammered away at their cameras. The defense attorney pressed on. "Then we request an immediate continuance until a new judge is appointed." Ebony leaned forward, arms resting on the bench. "That is precisely what I intend to do." She lifted her gavel. "In light of the conflict, this court shall stand in recess until the administrative judge grants reassignment." She brought the gavel down. The moment was surreal. Ebony Caldwell, the victim, officially presiding, albeit briefly, over the case of the men who had brutally attacked her. Gasps, whispers, and frantic scrawls from journalists filled the air. As Ebony rose to leave, Stokes suddenly lurched forward, speaking out of turn. "Your Honor!" he cried, desperation in his voice. The bailiff moved to restrain him, but Ebony motioned for calm. She lifted an eyebrow. "Yes, Mr. Stokes?" His face contorted as if he didn't know what to say. Finally, he spat. "This is a setup, a scam to ruin us. You think you can sit there and pretend to be fair?" Ebony's expression never wavered, though her pulse pounded. "Mr. Stokes, you are out of order. This matter will be addressed by another judge. Per the law, you will have your fair trial." Stokes glared, defiance mingling with a quiver of fear in his voice. "This is all because we dared to arrest you." Ebony gave him a measured look. "You dared to break the law and abuse your power. Any further disruptions and you'll be removed from this courtroom." Stokes opened his mouth, but the bailiff intervened, guiding him back. Trent remained silent, eyes fixed on the floor, his face pale. Ebony left the bench, every step burdened by the eyes of the entire room. She slipped through the side door leading to her chambers, her heart pounding so loudly it threatened to drown out all thought. Harriet was waiting there, wide-eyed. "You did the right thing, Judge Caldwell," she whispered. "They're just desperate." Ebony nodded, exhaling slowly. "Let's hope justice is served soon." For all the spectacle, Ebony felt no joy in the moment. She was a public servant, a guardian of the law. She wanted a legitimate judicial process that held criminals accountable, not a sensational show. But fate had placed her in this bizarre position. All she could do was follow the rules with integrity, even if it meant walking on this razor's edge of conflict. Outside, the headlines would scream about how the judge they assaulted takes the bench. Social media would erupt with debates, conspiracies, and moral outrage. But Ebony blocked it all out. She had a job to do, and she would do it the right way, even if she was the last person on earth who wanted to preside over Brian Stokes and Daniel Trent's day in court. Finally, after a flurry of legal wrangling, the administrative judge reassigned the case to a neutral jurist, Judge Aaliyah Chen, a no-nonsense veteran known for her fair yet strict courtroom demeanor. Ebony breathed a sigh of relief when she learned of the reassignment. Now justice could proceed unclouded by her personal involvement. Still, Ebony had to fulfill her role as a witness. The trial began under a heightened media spotlight, and Ebony took the stand once more, retelling the nightmare of her abduction. Tasha also testified, presenting her video evidence, which left the jury visibly disturbed. Captain Morris took the stand, clarifying departmental records showing multiple complaints against Stokes and Trent. Other victims testified, painting a comprehensive picture of corruption. Stokes and Trent's defense was flimsy, relying mostly on attacking the credibility of victims they had targeted for years. As the jury deliberated, tension gripped the city. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse. Media trucks lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward. Ebony spent those days in her chambers, continuing her docket of unrelated cases, trying to focus on her responsibilities. But a part of her couldn't help checking her phone for updates. When the jury returned, the verdict was delivered in a packed courtroom. Guilty on all major counts: assault, kidnapping, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and multiple lesser charges. The moment the word guilty echoed in the high-ceilinged room, a wave of relief swept through Ebony. She stood at the back of the gallery, out of the spotlight, hands clasped. Stokes and Trent hung their heads, their faces ashen. The bailiffs escorted them away, a final clang of shackles sealing their fate. Over the next few weeks, Ebony watched as both men were sentenced to substantial prison terms. They were also stripped of their law enforcement certifications. No chance of returning to a badge. Karma had arrived, but Ebony felt no triumph. She felt relief that maybe fewer people would suffer what she had suffered. Relief that the system, so often criticized, had functioned at least this time. In the days following the verdict, Ebony tried to move on. She continued her judicial duties, occasionally glimpsing her bruised reflection in the mirror, scars slowly fading. People called her a hero, but she didn't see herself that way. She was simply a woman who refused to be beaten down by a broken system. On a quiet evening, Ebony returned to her grandmother's old house, now hers, sitting on the front porch. She held a framed photo of Loretta Caldwell, remembering the wise words, "Child, the world ain't always fair, but don't let that stop you." A tear slipped down Ebony's cheek. In that moment, she felt Loretta's spirit around her, proud of how her granddaughter had fought for justice, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been wronged. Ebony stared at the horizon, watching the sunset, and promised silently to keep fighting, on the bench, in the community, wherever she was needed. Because though the battle with Stokes and Trent was over, the larger war against injustice continued, and Ebony Caldwell, battered but undaunted, would remain on the front lines. A month later, Cook County was still buzzing about the sensational trial that saw corrupt cops brought to justice. People who had once feared crossing paths with Stokes and Trent slept a bit easier. The police department, now under close scrutiny, enacted reforms mandated by Ebony's civil ruling. An independent oversight commission began reviewing cases, and Captain Morris was put in charge of cleaning up practices that bred misconduct. Tasha moved out of her old neighborhood for safety reasons, but she and Ebony stayed in touch. Tasha told Ebony she was finally considering going back to college. "I want to make something of myself," she said. "No more living in fear." Ebony offered her encouragement and even helped secure a small scholarship from a local nonprofit. James Harlow and Vanessa Blake threw a modest celebration for Ebony in the lobby of their law firm, honoring her perseverance. Over champagne glasses, Ebony thanked them for their unwavering support. "I couldn't have done any of this alone," she said, voice quivering with emotion. James grinned. "We just lit the path. You walked it." Vanessa raised her glass. "To Judge Caldwell, proof that the law can serve justice when guided by integrity." Their toast clinked in a harmonious chorus. Ebony felt a sense of belonging among people who believed in the power of doing what's right. In the courthouse, Ebony's reputation soared. Word spread of her fairness, her poise under pressure, and her personal experience with injustice that gave her unique empathy. She presided over various cases, family law matters, business disputes, criminal trials, always striving to balance compassion with the firm hand of the law. One day, Harriet entered Ebony's chambers with a letter in hand. "Judge Caldwell, this arrived for you." Ebony opened the envelope to find a handwritten note from an inmate at a state prison. The name on the letter made her pause. Daniel Trent. Heart-pounding, she read, "Judge Caldwell, I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. I was wrong. Stokes was wrong. We thought we were untouchable. We were hateful. Now I have years to think about the damage I caused. You gave me a small mercy by not letting us destroy you. I see that now. I don't ask for anything, just wanted you to know I'm not fighting reality anymore." Daniel Trent. A swirl of emotions overcame Ebony. She had no illusions that a simple apology undid his deeds. But perhaps it was a sign that even someone as twisted by hate could be forced to confront their conscience. She set the letter aside, uncertain what to feel. In time, Ebony found peace in her new life. The nightmares of that brutal night receded, replaced by cautious optimism. She believed her grandmother was watching from above, proud of the woman Ebony had become. On a cold winter evening, Ebony stood at the threshold of a community event in downtown Chicago, invited as a keynote speaker to discuss police reform. She gazed at the large crowd, students, activists, local residents, and a few uniformed officers from the newly reformed department. She cleared her throat, stepping to the podium. "Good evening," she began. "I'm here to talk about justice. A year ago I believed in justice intellectually, as a concept. Today I believe in it through lived experience. The path to accountability isn't easy, but when we work together, when we stand up to corruption, we can move mountains. Let's keep pushing forward, and let's never forget that every voice matters, your story matters." The applause that followed wasn't just for Ebony Caldwell, newly minted judge. It was for what she represented: resilience, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. And as she looked into the audience, Ebony felt a surge of hope for the future, one where no black woman, no person at all, would be forced to live in fear of those sworn to protect them. A future where the law served its true purpose: justice for all. Thank you for joining me on this powerful journey of resilience, justice, and triumph over prejudice. Ebony Caldwell's story reminds us that, in a world fraught with systemic biases, a single individual's courage can spark transformative change. From the harrowing night of her wrongful arrest to presiding as a judge in the very system that once failed her, Ebony's unyielding spirit illuminated a path to reform. She refused to surrender in the face of intimidation, and her pursuit of justice ultimately toppled the corrupt officers who abused their power. If you found value and inspiration in this story, I invite you to show your support. Give this video a like, share it across your social media, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that champion truth and hope. Together, let's keep the conversation alive and commit to building a more just world for everyone.